Okay, well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Rebecca Estrada, and I serve as the specialist for higher education workforce development with Los Alamos National Laboratory's Community Partnerships Office. And with me, and who will really be leading you through this process, is CJ Bacino, and he's our manager for talent acquisition. So basically the man with all the answers in terms of applying to Los Alamos National Laboratory. So just a little bit of context before we start. We are hiring. So we are so glad that you are here, and we are so glad that you are here at home, because let me just say, we are hiring. We are on track to hire 1,800 people this year alone. So that's a lot of people. So we need all of you. The other thing is, let's just talk a little bit about what people think about when they think about Los Alamos National Laboratory. They tend to think we're a bunch of scientists and engineers, and I'm just here to tell you I'm neither a scientist or an engineer. So yeah, me. So we're really looking, we'll always need scientists and engineers, of course, but that's about 25 to 30% of our workforce. The rest is really across all areas: accounting, construction, communications, procurement. What we're looking at, even in terms of our partnerships with our unions, we're looking at 300 plus building and construction trades type jobs in the next, 300 plus in the next 3 to 4 years. So there are all sorts of areas and all sorts of opportunities. We're really happy to say that over the last 3 years, most of our new hires have been New Mexicans. So we're doing a lot of work to make sure that we're growing in this region. Because again, I think people sometimes think, we bring people from all over the place, and it's not true. We know our best talent can be found right here. And it's a way to make sure that we're keeping you in your communities where you can be helpful to your families and to your community and stay where your roots are. And the other thing is to just understand we have lots of partnerships in terms of training. So for those of you who may have seen the Santa Fe Community College presentation that was beforehand, there was a note about our partnership with them in terms of the machining program. So again, we have these partnerships, again, with Santa Fe Community College, one with Northern New Mexico College, where you get in as soon as you're a student, you apply. If you're accepted, we're paying your tuition, your fees, your books, and we pay you to go to class. And then when you finish, we bring you on as a full-time employee as long as everything's satisfactory. So we have lots of partnerships like that are formal. We have others that are a little bit more informal. So we just like to make sure that we're at all the colleges and universities, making sure we're making those relationships and making those connections. So hopefully that means you guys see that there's a lot of possibilities and a lot of ways to enter into the workforce. But the main one, of course, is to just directly apply. So with that, I'm going to actually hand it over to CJ. And CJ, again, did I mention he's the man with all the answers?
Let's see if that's going to thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'm going to stand, and hopefully that won't be a problem, so I can reference these slides a little bit easier. As Rebecca mentioned, my name is CJ Bacino. I am the HR manager responsible for talent acquisition at Los Alamos National Laboratory. And today what I want to talk to you about is how to apply for a job at the lab and things to consider when you do. We get a lot of questions, and Rebecca alluded to some of these. Typically, what kinds of jobs do you have? And I just want to reiterate something that Rebecca said that's very, very important. People think of Los Alamos as a science and engineering laboratory, which it is, and then they make this connection and this assumption that those are the only jobs that we hire for. And while we do indeed hire for a lot of scientist and engineer type positions, we are hiring across the board, and there is a lot of opportunity right now at the laboratory. I will also say this, the growth potential at the laboratory in terms of your career trajectory, I believe right now is as good as it has ever been, because we are hiring so much and there is so much opportunities at all levels and within all disciplines. People are finding that they are moving up within the laboratory once they're in more quickly than perhaps they did in the past. So also a very good place to work if you are thinking about having a long-term career as well. Okay, well, let's talk about this hiring process situation. I'm going to take you through a couple of items today. First, an interesting question. Should I apply? But I want to talk to you about some things to consider around that. Better practice resumes. We'll look at a very specific LANL cover letter technique, which is very unique to the laboratory. And as I talk about that, one of the caveats I'm going to say is this may not necessarily be the best advice if you're applying somewhere else. But if you're applying at Los Alamos National Laboratory, there is a cover letter technique, and I'm going to explain the why behind it. Because I think what's really important for you all to understand is this. What is the game that is being played behind the scenes by the hiring manager or the selection committee, right? And I want you to understand what that game is so you can play it to the best of your ability. We'll talk about some interviewing technique, how to apply and navigate our systems, and then I'm quickly just going to talk about some effective ways to get found by the lab, including social media, particularly LinkedIn, because that's a tool that we use. We'll also tell you that's a top tool in industry as well. So that's not just specific to LANL. So for those of you who are out there looking for work, if you don't have a LinkedIn profile, think about having one, and we'll give you some tips for how to have a good one. Okay, let's go ahead and start. So here's the deal. I frequently will get feedback from people who will say, hey, I applied to a job and I was qualified for that job and I didn't get it. What happened? Right? And so this is the thing that you have to think about when applying for a job, not only the lab, but anywhere. You have to remember it is a comparative process. And you are being compared against two things. The first thing that you're being compared against, of course, is the minimum qualifications that are stated in the job posting. But then you're also being compared to the strengths of the other candidates who have applied. So you see here, when I get this question, I was qualified for the job, why didn't I get it? It's really about, were you the best qualified candidate for the position? So when you see a job opportunity, you really have to think this through. Am I really qualified? What really are my chances of getting this position? Let me give you one hint. If you cannot address all of the minimum qualifications that are laid out in the job ad, you are not qualified for that position. And in fact, you won't even be considered for it. And that we get from being a government contractor and having to follow rules that are set up by the government, which says to us, you may not consider candidates that do not meet all of the minimum qualifications for the job. You've said this is what the job is about. If you hire somebody who doesn't meet those qualifications, you're going to get yourself in a whole lot of trouble. So you have to kind of see that from the employer's perspective, right? So this is the thing that I want everybody to remember. Now, related to this conversation is this question about desired skills. Because when you look at our job ad, or really any employer's job ad, you're going to see minimum qualifications, and then you're going to see desired skills. And you're not called exactly those terms. It'll be something like that. Typically, candidates who are selected for positions not only are meeting all of the minimum qualifications, which they have to, but they're usually meeting some, most, in some cases, all of the desired skills. So when you look at a job at the lab or anywhere else, you can kind of gauge how competitive you're going to be for that position just based on not only meeting the bins, but how many of those desired skills might you be able to meet as well. That kind of gives you an idea of your level of competitiveness. I will say, before I leave this slide, a lot of people want to work at Los Alamos, and I frequently see what I call carpet bombing of applying, which is I will go out there and apply for every position, including ones that I am nowhere near qualified for, in an attempt to get a job because I just need to get my foot in the door. That's reasonable, I get it, but you have to understand your chances of being interviewed or selected are going to be pretty minimal if you can't meet those minimum and at least some of those desired skills. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is not a guarantee that if you do all the things that I say to do, that you will be selected for a job. But I do believe this. It will definitely increase your chances if you do these things, especially if you're not doing them today. Okay, let's go to the next slide. All right. I covered some of these topics as we went into this particular section here. Should you apply? I cannot tell you to apply. I cannot tell you that you cannot apply. That decision is all up to you. You can apply if you choose to do so. Here are the things I think that you should be thinking of. Are you truly interested in the position? This is your career. I'm going back to the carpet bombing application process again. I see people who apply for things, when I look at their resumes and their materials and their backgrounds, I'm like, I don't even see the connection. And it makes me say to myself, are you truly interested in this opportunity, or are you just trying to get a job? We have so many jobs open. Be selective. Do something that you want to do, something you're excited to apply for. We talked about the importance of being able to meet all of the minimum requirements in the position. We also talked about the importance of being able to reasonably respond to at least some, even better if most or all, of the desired skills. And we also talked about our contractual responsibility as a government contractor and not being able to consider candidates who don't meet minimums. So hopefully this kind of helps you to with a little bit more information of how we have to think about hiring as well. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Let's talk about resumes. Now, we have a sample up here, and I want to tell you that it is indeed a sample. Okay, so don't think that this is the only format for a resume in the world. You can do all kinds of different formats. You could choose to, use colored paper and spray things with perfume, but I would highly recommend not, right? But here's the point. It wouldn't matter because I'm going to receive everything electronically, so we could smell it anyway. But here's the key things that you need to have on your resume. First, obviously, your contact information. Then this professional summary or objective. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more and why that's important and a little trick I think you can use in this section. Your summary of skills or key competencies, your work history, education, any additional information that is relevant. You had publications, presentations, awards, recognitions, etc. And let's go to the next slide because it's going to take a little bit of a deeper dive in here. Okay. Here's the thing, a lot of people don't want to hear this. Can I have a standard resume that I use to apply for every job? No, good, the audience is everyone's already shaking their head, very good. That's correct, and I see a lot of candidates make that mistake. I'm just gonna have one resume, and I'm gonna use that to apply for every position that I'm interested in, right? Let's talk about why some of that doesn't work. First of all, in the professional summary, where you sort of talk about what is it that you want to do and who you are in a sort of summarized way, I have seen people reference that they want a job in that section that is not at all related to the job that they have applied to, right? And nothing will turn a recruiter or a hiring official off faster than that. And that's the first thing on the resume, right? So make sure that whatever that professional profile is, that summary that you're going to use, make sure it aligns to the specific job that you are applying to. Very important. Now, this highlights section. Let's talk about this. Okay, two things. Somebody wrote the job ad that you applied to. And when they wrote it, they were thinking about what they see the job as being, right? And they've chosen specific words to define that job. So when you apply, you know what you want to do? You want to give those words right back to them. Because if I'm a hiring manager and I've defined the job with certain keywords or key things that I'm looking for, what's the fastest way that I know you're qualified for the job? I see those exact same words and phrases on your application materials, right? And so when I see those, I go, qualified. I'm going to read further into the resume. Okay, so go back to this concept of you use a different resume for every job you apply to. I'm going to tell you to do this. Scan the job ad. Copy and paste if you want to, right? But lift those exact same keywords and phrases and put them in this highlight section right in the front of the resume. That's going to help people believe that you're qualified. Now, you can't lie. So don't just go copy and paste everything and put it up there as if it pertains to you. But the things that do pertain to you, make sure you get them in there. Here's the other thing that's true, and this is going to be true in the entire resume. Some employers, Los Alamos isn't doing this currently, but many employers simply do keyword searches on resumes, or they even have automated systems that when you apply are looking for those keywords, and then they're somehow evaluating you, and maybe they're throwing you out, maybe they're downgrading scoring, those kinds of things, right? So if you don't have language in your resume that does not match the language from the job ad, which is likely the language that's being used to determine who's qualified, who's not qualified, you're going to get thrown out of competitions, right? So again, another reason, copy and paste key things from the job ad that you are qualified to do. Okay, then we're going to get into the section that's really all about your work experience. And you see, you could do small paragraphs, you could do bullets. I get asked these things all the time. I think both are okay. Me personally, I prefer bullets because they're faster and easier for me to read, but I don't think most hiring officials would care if you had a small paragraph in for each of those things as well. But also in this area, try to really address what was listed in the job posting for minimum qualifications and desired skills. So here's another area where you may have to do some rewriting to make that happen. Okay, that's my key takeaway here is make your resume sound like the job you're applying to. This might seem like a really simple concept, but I cannot tell you how many times this is missed by applicants. This doesn't happen. We can go to the next slide, please. Here's the other thing that most applicants miss, and I'm going to tell you, I think 75 to 80% of applicants miss this. Your resume is not a historical document of what you have done. It is a marketing tool that shows what you can do. Therefore, you have to quantify and qualify your statements as much as possible. Don't just say that you've done something. Say something about how well you did it. Was it hard to do? Was it a challenge, but you still succeeded? You got around it. Was the budget especially large? Did you bring it in on time or even before it was due? Did you win an award or a recognition for doing it? You have to market yourself, not just say what you've done, but how well you did it. And let me tell you why. Because in most cases, there is some sort of scoring going on because we have to determine what's the difference between candidates. Oh, I don't know. It could be 1 to 10, 1 to 5. It could be A, B, C, D. It could be red, yellow, green. Whatever is happening at our organization or other organizations, people have to find a way to compare candidates. So let's just take this 1 to 5 scoring for a moment. If you tell me that you have done something that simple, you'll probably get a 3 for that. If you tell me that you've done something, but you did it really well, or it was really hard, particularly challenging, big, etc., now you might get a 4 or a 5 for that. So if you don't market yourself, if you don't do this additional quantifying and qualifying of your statements, you're not separating yourself from the rest of the candidates. That's how you get ahead of the rest of the candidate pool, is by doing this. And we have an example here. Here's just something I did. I conducted audits and implemented process improvements. But here's quantifying and qualifying the statement. I conducted audits and implemented process improvements that resulted in an X amount of dollar savings and increased customer service ratings, and the initiative was nominated for a best practice award. That candidate just got a 5. The candidate above that probably got a 3, right? And if you do this for all of your statements and that adds up, That's how you move on to getting selected for an interview. And I'm going to tell you that gets missed a lot. Okay, just some additional resume tips. Some of these may apply to the lab more specifically, and some may be more general. We talked about this, the importance of this executive summary, matching words and phrases from the job posting. In the work history and experience section, use action verbs. Oh, I get asked this question all the time, so I'm just going to tell you. It's always in past tense. People always ask me this question. What tense is a resume written in? It's always written in past tense. Even if it's your current job, your first bullet, right? It's something you're currently doing, it's always in past tense. So that, just keep that as a general rule. That makes things easier for everybody. For us, a clearance is often required for a position. You do have to be a US citizen in order to obtain a clearance. So if you are applying for a job at the lab and you see the clearance requirement, please note that you are a US citizen. That just helps us to know that you're clearance eligible, essentially. Another question I get asked. You don't have to have a clearance to work at the lab initially. That one we get all the time, where people will say, I'm not going to apply because I don't have a clearance. You don't have to have the clearance. You have to have the ability to obtain a clearance. And one of those qualifications is US citizenship. So that's why that's important. The laboratory also has a very robust student program. Internships across high school, undergraduate, post-undergraduate, masters, postmasters, postdocs. There's different requirements for those. If you are applying for those, make sure you put your GPA on the resume. That's very, very important. You have to have a 3.0 for undergraduate and a 3.2 for graduate. We do recommend that you save your resume as a PDF just to protect and lock in your formatting. And then when you upload documents, make sure you're always marking them very clearly as to what they are. Is it the resume? Is it the cover letter, etc. And probably the job requisition number. All of ours start with the letters IRC followed by 5 or 6 numbers. We do have more information on our little website regarding this. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay. Let's talk about cover letter, especially at Los Alamos National Laboratory. I told you I was going to tell you about what's going on behind the scenes so you can play the game. Here's the game that's usually being played. Typically, there is a selection committee. Okay. Typically, they're using a scoring matrix. So just think about a giant Excel spreadsheet with all the names of the candidates down the side, and then all the qualifications across the top. And then each selection committee is literally reviewing your materials, and in each of those items, they're scoring you, whatever that is, 1 to 5, 1 to 10, 1 to green, A, B, C, D, whatever that is. They're adding all of that up at the bottom of that giant Excel spreadsheet, and they are drawing a line somewhere. And they are saying everybody who scores above X, right, moves on to get an interview. So that is the game. You are up against a scoring matrix, right? So why is a cover letter at Los Alamos so important in this specific technique? We actually recommend for your cover letter that you copy and paste the minimum requirements and as many of the desired skills as you can address into your cover letter, and then with a few bullets or a few small paragraphs, whichever you prefer, address each one individually, demonstrating how you not only meet, but hopefully exceed, because remember, you're going to quantify and qualify your statements, so you're going to market yourself, right? Why is this important? When you do that, the selection committee has a guide. It's that simple. They can see the requirement, what you've written, and it helps them to score you higher because of it. If you write a generic cover letter and don't address those requirements, they now have to take a look at your resume cover, and they have to sort of like transpose and transfigure and try to cross-reference like what fits where. And in that process, you are likely to lose points on the scoring matrix and then not be selected for an interview. So, as arduous and as unique as this cover letter technique is for Los Alamos, it is critical that you do this. A few things about this. Does this mean that I have to write a detailed cover letter for every job I apply to at the lab? Not to increase your chances, it really does. I asked you this question. I've been told my whole life, if you write a cover letter, keep it short and sweet because nobody cares, right? At Los Alamos, every member of that selection committee will read every word that you wrote because they have to be able to score. So don't worry about the length of your cover letter. That's right, I just said it. Don't worry about the length of your cover letter. What? Yeah, even if it goes on and it's longer than your resume or your CV, if that's what it takes. Don't worry about that. Do the technique. That's what is most important. Okay, let's go to the next slide here. So this is essentially what the cover letter looks like. This is what I've just described to you. Because you're going to spend so much time responding to each requirement, you can really keep the first part and the last part of this short. And that the hiring officials really appreciate because they're doing all of the detailed work in the middle. So just a brief introduction explaining sort of who you are, what your aspirations are, why you're interested in the position. Then, like I said, you're going to copy and paste these requirements. You're going to address each one individually. And then you just need a brief closing, so essentially thanking them for their consideration and politely requesting an interview. I think I may have a hand raised in the audience unless you're stretching there.
No,
Yes.
I do have a question.
Yes.
On some of the job postings, some of the desired requirements or match the minimum requirement as well. And so do you want to see both of those listed in the cover letter? So in fact, I'm duplicating not only the two requirements, but then also the same answers?
Yeah, it could, it shouldn't happen that they're exactly the same. So if that's happening, that's truly an error. Usually what I see is there's like a baseline in the minimum, and then there's like the step up in the desired, as if to say, even better if, in addition to this, you've actually done that, right? But your point about desired skills, incredibly important. You do want to address as many desired skills as you possibly can in the cover letter. So in addition to the minimums, do whatever desired you can. Just go back to what I started with this presentation. Selected candidates not only meet minimums, they're also usually meeting some, most, or even all of the desired skills as well. In other words, the desired skills are the icing on the cake, right? The minimum requirements is the cake. The desired skills, the frosting. Guess which cake we want? The one with frosting. Don't most of you? I know some people hate frosting. So maybe that's not the best analogy, but you all get what I'm saying. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. In your cover letter, here is something to remember. You can stretch. I'm okay with you stretching. Just don't break because you lie, right? But I see a lot of who could really be potentially qualified candidates read job ads and they screen themselves out. And I will tell you, there's research that actually indicates that women are more likely to screen themselves out than men, which is a huge diversity problem, right? Women will look at a job ad and they will say, if I do not meet all of the qualifications, I'm not going to apply. Men will read a job ad and say, I need one qualification, I'll throw my hat in. I might be exaggerating that a little bit, but there actually is research that shows that. So there's a diversity impact that happens. I don't want you to screen yourself out if you think you are qualified. I want you to apply. But if you need to, you can think about things a little bit differently. A lot of our requirements are, you'll notice when you read them, they're kind of vague. That's not an accident. That's intentional. Hiring managers and selection committees want to see what you will write towards that, to see how you will respond to that requirement, right? So our example here is, demonstrated experience managing supervising, right? And you might say, well, I've never been a manager, I've never been a supervisor, so that's it, I'm out. But wait a minute, what does it mean to be a manager or a supervisor? Have you coached people? Have you mentored people? Have you ever been responsible for a budget? Did you ever lead any projects? All of those things is what it means to be a manager or a supervisor, right? So if you can write things to a requirement, don't necessarily screen yourself out. especially if it's a job you're really interested in and otherwise feel you are very, very qualified for. Try to write to the requirement. Again, never lie or over exaggerate your experience. That's the caveat. But you can stretch. Okay. If you're selected for an interview, things to consider in the interview process. Great, you did everything I just said, and as a result, you did great on that scoring metrics. They called, you got an interview. This is fantastic. Okay. Please learn about the laboratory. Please know something about us, what we do, our mission. Be able to talk about that. We're going to talk about questions later, but be able to ask smart questions related to that. That's very important, and it always impresses a selection committee. Any of you have ever been on a selection committee, when somebody talks about the lab, how many times do you hear this phrase? They really did their research. That's what they say. They really did their research, right? And that's a good thing. So learn not only about the lab, but any company you apply for, learn something about it. Websites nowadays are so robust. It's so easy to do. This is what I think will happen to you during an interview. The process is very similar to that scoring matrix, but now they're scoring you during the interview. So guess what that means? Every person on the selection committee has been assigned a question that aligns to the minimum requirements noted in the job posting and the desired skills, right? Because they have to judge on those things. So if requirement A is you must have done this, right? The first interview question you're going to get is, tell me a time when you did that, right? You're going to get some sort of behavioral-based question that is asked for you to demonstrate how you meet the requirement that was noted in the job posting. So if you study the job posting before your interview, if you go back to your cover letter, which should have done this exact same thing, right? It's the exact same exercise, only writing. You should already be 75% of the way to being fairly well prepared for an interview, right? So that's what you can expect to be asked. Make sure that you express why you want the job. I think this is another question you get. Usually when we get to our round of here's the questions in line to the job ad, the next thing we will ask you is something about why do you want the job? Why are you interested? Do not say because you really need a job. The money is so good at the lab. The benefits are so great, right? All that is true, but that's not what the selection committee wants to hear, right? So make sure you have a thoughtful response about the mission of the laboratory, the work, what you want to do with your career, how this opportunity fits into your overall career trajectory, those kinds of things. That's how you want to answer that question. We can go to the next slide. You will almost always be asked this question, any interview I've ever been in. I hate the question, but everyone asks it. Tell us about your greatest strengths and your latest developmental needs. You know you're going to get that question. You all know you're going to get that question. Be prepared. Now, I'm not going to focus on strengths because you all know how to talk about how great you are. Okay? Here's the thing. Give a thoughtful answer to what is your biggest developmental area. Do not give, if I may use this term, a BS answer like, I'm a perfectionist. And I know you've all been trained to answer that question that way. And here's the problem, everybody knows to answer the question that way. So when a candidate answers a question like that, a selection committee goes, oh gosh, right? Instead, be honest. Talk about a real developmental need that you have. Show that you are self-aware and that you can do that. And then do this. Always do this, because if you don't do this next part, you save yourself. Talk about what you're doing to improve yourself. Talk about what you're doing to address that developmental area. I love that. Because now I think the candidate is not only self-aware, they're actually taking action to get better. I want this person to work for me. Right? What I don't want to hear is that you are a perfectionist as an answer to this question, or one of those other things that it's so tricky because like, oh, if I say that, it sounds like I'm answering the question, but at the same time, it makes it sound like I'm being positive. Yeah, I get it. I get the game. Okay. You will at one point be asked what questions that you have. Always, 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 you do have questions. You never do not have questions. You always have questions, and you have questions because you've researched. And you were going to ask really smart things like, what do you think is the best thing about working here? Or what do you think are the biggest challenges around working here? What's a typical day like here? Tell me about the team that I would be working with, right? Ask smart questions that show that you care. Do not ask about things like salary and benefits. If it gets to an offer, all of that will get discussed, okay? So don't jump to that. And finally, this is kind of a funny one, but it is so true. Express interest and demonstrate your passion for the job. The laboratory, we occasionally have candidates who make us feel that it would be our great honor if we made them an offer to work at the laboratory, right? And I have to tell you, that kind of egotistical grandstanding always sinks a candidate. I've never seen a selection committee impressed by aloofness from a candidate who's like, I don't know, you guys would be lucky to have me. Great, we would like to not have you. It works that simply. So just make sure you express interest. I know that sounds crazy, but we see that. Okay, how to apply. I'm going to get through this pretty quickly here. Hopefully you've all been to our website or you've applied to positions before. Hopefully, I hope it was an easy experience for you. I'm looking at you because you got it. Easy experience. Did you get through it okay? Did you have any troubles?
Yeah, no, it's
Glad to hear it. Fantastic. But we'll just walk with you. We can go to the next slide. When you go to our career page, which is lionel.jobs, it is that simple, lionel.jobs. You'll see that there's a way to search for jobs. You can do some keyword searches or by categories, disciplines, those kinds of things. We can go to the next slide. It will pop the job up for you. You'll get the full description of the job. If you're interested, you simply click the apply button. This actually takes you now into the laboratory. Now you are inside of the laboratory. And so this part is a little redundant. We're working on this, but yes, you do have to hit a second apply now button because now you're in a new system. You're inside the laboratory. So if you would apply now, then go to the next slide. One of two things, well, this is what will come up, but here's the deal. You've either already created a profile, so you would log in this case. But if you didn't have a profile in place, then you would click register. And I will say, I mean, I think this is true. Others may disagree with me. I think our application process is relatively easy in terms of the registration piece. We only really ask you a few questions, and then we ask you to upload your resume and cover letter for consideration. We are not one of these companies that's going to ask you, fill out your entire work experience. Where did you work? What did you do? From what dates? Right? We're not doing any of that. We're just getting that off of the resume. So you'll either be able to log in or register. We can go to the next slide. Once that has happened, then you'll be able to upload your files after you've been asked a very few questions. Then you'll be able to add files. So you just simply click the add button. And then if you go to next, and then we can go to the next slide. Oh, I guess that's the last of that we're going to show you. But it just will allow you to show you in your system for you to upload the files, select the ones that you want. And remember what I said about trying to label things as resume for this requisition number, cover letter for this requisition number. It just helps us to understand which documents are which. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here, but there are sometimes application issues that can happen with just different systems trying to talk to one another. What you really need to know is we have all this information on our website should you run into a problem. And then we also have an apply help email, and we also have an apply help phone number. Also, if you are an individual with a disability and you need help with the application process and accommodation, we also provide those as well. And you get there by simply reaching out to that same email address or to that same phone number. Okay, we can move on to the next slide. This is just the apply help information that I just shared with you. I do want to, of course, remind you that we are an equal opportunity employer. The laboratory is very, very much so committed to a diverse and inclusive work environment. It's critically important to us. We understand that to do world-class science, you need different thoughts, opinions, backgrounds, skills, experiences from the broadest range of people. So we actively search for diversity in our candidates. It's also very important to us once you're hired that we are creating an inclusive working environment where you feel like regardless of any group or differences that you may have, that you belong, that you are valued, that you do in fact feel like you can have a full career at the laboratory. You can fully participate, that people are engaging with you. All of that is central to our success. And when any of that breaks down for us, then we start losing that diversity of thoughts and opinions. And it actually means that the science isn't as good. It means the operations of the business isn't as good, right? We need that diversity. So we are fully committed to equal opportunity. Okay, LinkedIn profile. Now, I'm not a LinkedIn expert. You should have somebody from LinkedIn come and talk to you if that's what you want. But there are some things to know. This is right now in the United States, it has been for quite a while, the #1 way that recruiters search for candidates. That's not just true at the laboratory, it's true everywhere. This is like the #1 recruiting tool out there. Everyone uses LinkedIn. If you are looking for a job and you're not on LinkedIn, you are disadvantaging yourself. You need to get a profile on LinkedIn. Now, go back to our previous conversation. A recruiter is looking for somebody to do a specific job. So you've got something that you are interested in. Maybe it's marketing. Let's just use marketing as an example. What do you think that recruiter is going to search for as a keyword on LinkedIn? Marketing, right? So if your profile doesn't mention marketing, guess what? You can't be discovered. So make sure that you sound like the kind of work that you want to do. It's incredibly important. Here are some other things that I think are important. Photos, making sure that you're very clear in your location, information in terms of where you want to work, are you willing to relocate, those types of things. That's really important for recruiters. It's really important for us at the lab because so much of our work has to happen here. We need people who want to relocate. For those of you who are in the room, if you live here, the good news is you're all here, so that may not be as big of a deal. Make sure that you do fill out and complete your summary and your experience section. The summary is really a great place to kind of take those executive bullets we were talking about and sort of turn that into that executive summary or that elevator pitch, you know. Be a little flashy in this area to try to set yourself aside. When you're talking about your experience, remember to quantify and qualify your statements. LinkedIn especially is not a place for your history. It is a place for your marketing. So remember that again in that section. We can go to the next slide. If you have any pictures or videos to share, that is great. Make sure that you have your education information in there as well. And then any endorsements. LinkedIn has this thing that allows your colleagues, people you've previously worked with, people who know you, etc., to give you an endorsement, and then that goes into your profile. For a lot of recruiters, that starts to speak to qualifying your statements, right? Because other people are saying good things about you, right? So when you can get endorsements, that's super important. And I think for recruiters, it speaks to them. I think they like to see those kinds of endorsements in there. LinkedIn has a lot of information on their own website about what's an effective profile. Here's some other things just to think about. In addition to having that professional, complete profile that we just talked about, LinkedIn also allows you to join groups. So colleges, universities that you went to, former employers, companies that you are interested in, all of you could request to join the Los Alamos National Laboratory LinkedIn page, and we will be happy to accept you onto that. It also becomes another recruiting source for us as well, right? So make sure that you are following or joining groups. And here's the other reason why this is so important. One, networking. This is a way to get to know people who are also in that group, so you can start sending them messages through LinkedIn and communicating with them. As you all know, networking is incredibly important to getting a job. But the other thing is that when you join groups, they oftentimes throw out job opportunities to you. So now you start to receive information about that organization, including potential job opportunities. So for you, With somebody looking for a job, it becomes another way to source. And it's an incredibly powerful way, because if you've made those connections, you also now have the built-in network to talk to related to that position, which is one step in that a lot of people don't have, but something you can get through LinkedIn. I think those are the key things. And I think if you go to the next slide, we're going to find we're done. Yep. Okay. I don't know where we are in time. I've probably done horrible with that, as I usually do.
You're perfect.
Am I good?
Mhm.
Do we have time for questions or comments if there are any?
Yeah.
Okay, great. What questions or comments do people have, including people out there in the ether? If anybody has a. Yes.
Once you follow all use all the special sauce and follow all the processes to play the game, so to speak, to use your examples. Is there, I don't know, are there appropriate follow-up steps to take? Like, once you put in your application, it's kind of
Yeah.
gone.
And if any of you have ever applied for a job at Los Alamos National Laboratory, you also know that we don't necessarily win the award for fastest hiring process. We can be a little slow, and that's part of it because we're so methodical in our selection. But I'm glad that you asked the question about follow-up, because this comes up a lot. And I want to ensure all of you, it is okay at Los Alamos, and in my opinion, anywhere, to follow up on a job that you have applied to. Every job you apply to has some contact on that original job ad. That may turn out to be a generalist or a recruiter. It might actually be the actual hiring manager. And I always get this question: is it okay for me to reach out to them just to ask for a status on where my job is? The answer is absolutely, it's okay to do that. Don't be afraid of that. I get random calls, usually several a day, where somebody will call me and say, can you check on the status of the job that I've applied to? And I'm like, I can, but you don't even be better. You should reach out to the contact that was on the job ad, right? Because I can only see so much in the system. I can't really answer questions too well for people. But you absolutely can follow up. That is not a problem at all. I will tell you that me personally, I actually like a candidate that does that, because it shows initiative, it shows the ability to follow up, and it shows a true interest in the occupation. And it's probably a good reminder for me as a hiring manager that I'm not moving as fast as I should be. So all of that's good. I'm okay with that. Great question. What other questions do people have? Or thoughts? Yes, sir.
Well, I know national labs often do like classified projects. So like if like everything went well with the interview process, and after that, like do a lot of people just kind of get surprised with what project they get put on?
Do people get surprised on the projects that they get put on? I'm going to answer yes and no. To your point, sometimes the work is very, very classified. So the job ad itself can't get too much into the details of what you would be doing. P.S. If you start at the lab and you don't have a clearance, you won't be doing any classified work anyway, right? We'll find other work that you can do while you're getting your clearance. But eventually your clearance comes in, at least we hope, right? Okay. And then you're going to get assigned to do some new work that maybe up until this point you weren't even privy to, or you couldn't know about in detail. I think if that is a surprise to people, I think it's an exciting surprise, right? I mean, that's my hunch, and that's what I typically hear from people. The lab is not a place, I will not say that it never happens, but the lab is not really a place where I hear from people, I applied to this job, I got this job, and then it's nothing like it said it was going to be. I don't hear that complaint very often. As I mentioned before, because of the growth that we are currently doing, because of our expanded mission, there are so many opportunities to do different things. And all of us as lab employees are frequently challenged to stretch and to do things that are maybe a little bit outside of our normal job duties. For me, that's exciting, right? Because I feel like I get to do new and different things. And I get to stay fresh and I get to feel like I'm challenged, right? So hopefully for most people, that's a good thing. That's an exciting thing. And I would say if you're looking for a job or a career at the laboratory, I would actually say you should anticipate that over time, there will be new and different things to do.
And if you're at all interested in terms of understanding like a day-to-day for people's job, most people who work at the laboratory, and we're good entrees to make those introductions, are willing to talk to you about it, right? Or even our own. I've been there for 3 years. And so I can tell, I did one of those 7-page cover letters that felt really weird, but was totally what needed to be done. So I think most people are willing to share their experiences with you in this room alone. I am. CJ, my colleague in the back, Patrick Duran, is also, we're all, Patrick and I are relatively new compared to some of our colleagues who've been here for 25, 30 years. So happy to talk to you about the experience and what it looks like. And there are really nice benefits. Don't talk about them in the interview, but there are nice benefits, not just in terms of the things that we traditionally think of, but the kind of teamwork, the evolution, what CJ talked about in terms of your ability to grow. There's educational support if that's what you want to do, which then allows you to become promotable and, et cetera, et cetera. There's all sorts of movement and all sorts of stories about people who started in high school and then, are now directors. So there are all sorts of opportunities. And I think I cut off a question.
If you upload your resume and your cover letters and everything to the system, if you've made an update, I have two more questions. First of all, if you made an update to your resume or improved it at all, can you just upload your new one and delete your old one and not mess up the system?
Correct. Our current system, unfortunately, does not allow you to go in and edit an existing document. What you have to do is delete that document and then add a new one in its place. And important information, that is true as long as the job is still open. Once that job closes, it does lock those documents. And that's just out of fairness so that, people can't, constantly be changing documents.
So if you change it in your profile, it doesn't necessarily change it in the jobs that you've applied for.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So then my next question kind of goes hand in hand with that. On your profile, you have kind of a bin of documents. And all of your cover letters for all the jobs that you applied for are there. Do all of the jobs that you applied for, can they see all of your cover letters? Or just the one that goes with the job that you applied for?
Yes and no. When you apply for a job, the system auto-generates that resume to whoever the hiring official is, and they only see that resume, right? If they were to go into the system and look at your profile, we can do one more question. Okay. If they go in and look at your profile, they can see the totality of all of the positions that you've applied for, all your documents, which is why it's so important to label them resume, cover letter, and then that requisition number, IRC, in our case, IRC, and the 5 or 6 numbers. Yes, we only have time for one more question, so it will be you. Okay.
When you say you meet the minimum requirements, there is a difference between PhD and a bachelor's and 4 years of experience. Do you rather look at the PhD or the 4-year experience? Do you hear them both?
So the laboratory uses equivalencies that we have established. So if the job, for example, says you have to have a bachelor's and 5 years of experience, there's an equivalency there if you don't have the bachelor's, but you have more years of relevant experience. Or if you have a master's, you actually get credit for that and don't then have to have the 5 years of experience, right? So we do always comment, and you'll see this in all of our job ads. It will say this degree in this many years, but then it will almost always say, or an equivalent combination of education and experience. There are some places at the lab where this is not true. To be an engineer or a scientist at the laboratory, you must have a bachelor's degree at least in science or engineering. There's no equivalency for that.
But again, that's not every, so again, I just want to say, that's not every job. So,
Not at
you know,
all.
yeah, so tell your friends. Did I mention that we're hiring?
That's how we'll leave it. We'll leave it where we started. We are hiring. Please apply.
And all across the board, all sorts of.
All kinds of jobs and
All
just
kinds of-
really all kinds. I think we're probably out of time, so thank you all very much for your time, and thank all of you who are calling or wherever you are for joining us.